Whole new experience.
Totally. I'm still digesting it.
Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavis, Pedig Zayin, Halacha Aleph. This will be the final daf in Halacha Aleph. We're learning today daf Nun Vav. We left off on daf Nun Vav, Amid Aleph, 3 lines from the top of the Amid Vaharei Chamoir. So just quickly recapping that we just learned in the Mishnah that there is an Isur to do Schayra, to merchandise, Nevelos, Treifosh, Katzam, and Amas. We learned in a Braisa that actually the Braisa quotes a psukim in the Torah that imply this prohibition. And I know that when we learned this Friday, we insisted, according to most, explicitly discussed by the Trumas Hadeshen, that the Temeim Heima Lochem is only an asmachta, because the entire Isur is only midrabanan. Just for the record, that the Mishnah Lamelech and some others understand in the Rambam that the Rambam understood this Braisa not to be an asmachta, but it's a din Torah. Be that as it may, the big chiddush that we learned in the Braisa from the pasuk as source / asmachta temeim heima lochem, that the isur of doing schayra with non-kosher foods is only foods that are non-kosher on the doiraisa level. Davar she'isura is min ha-Torah. But if you have foods that are only asur midrabanan, primarily the examples that we gave were all those drabanans that we learned together in Masechtas Avodah Zarah, like chalav stam, like bishul, etc. So there is no isur to do schayra with it, and that will be true even if it's a din Torah. It's only for devarim that are asur min ha-Torah. So first of all, we're going to begin today's daf, closing up that topic, challenging it, resolving all of the challenges, and then the Gemara is going to go back to the Mishnah that was speaking about, and that's actually how we got there, that there is an isur schayra, there's a prohibition of merchandising peiroi shvi'is. The Mishnah says that if someone picks vegetables and their son sells it, even though it's their son, since it's not the same person that picked it, which is how you acquire it during shvi'is, and that's not the same one who sold it, that's not called merchandising, and that will be permitted. That's the clear in the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to bring a Braisa that will come with many details and therefore with many exceptions of this rule that we learned in the Mishnah. There is a concept called havla'ah. The concept of havla'ah literally means to swallow. Just as an example, schar Shabbos is something that rabbinically we may not do, which means that if I'm paying someone to do something for me on Shabbos, not something that may not be done, something that may be done, ideally, you're not supposed to pay them for the work that they did on Shabbos. That's called schar Shabbos. So, for example, if a person has a housekeeper, and the housekeeper is not doing anything else, they're simply cleaning up the house, they're doing tasks that I would have been allowed to do. If I only hired them for Shabbos, then I'm not supposed to pay them. The fact is that we have housekeepers, and Hashem should bless all of us to afford to have all the housekeep that you need. But what do we do with schar Shabbos? Just as an example, you hire them not only for Shabbos, you hire them for Shabbos, you hire them for Monday or for Sunday if you could, and for Tuesday, v'chulei. So, and when you pay them, you don't only pay them for the work they did for Shabbos, you pay them for 50 hours of work. Even, by the way, even if the roiv of those hours was done on Shabbos. I'm just giving an example of where we apply the concept of havla'ah. If the schar, if the salary that they are getting paid for Shabbos is swallowed in a larger number, not Shabbos related, in the example that I gave, that will be lachatchila muter, without any problem. We're going to learn the dinim of havla'ah, how they are employed by peiroi shvi'is, and I know that many people are familiar. We also learned this in the Bavli. Again, when it comes to the shvi'is here, and sometimes the dalad minim that people buy are dalad minim that grew in the Holy Land, and if they grew on the shvi'is here, so we have to also deal with the issue of merchandising peiroi shvi'is, and one of the solutions will be havla'ah. Havla'ah would mean, with the presumption that there's no problem b'chlal with the lulav, let's go with that. There's certainly no problem with the arava. So the esrig is a fruit. So instead of you paying $100 for the esrig, or today $500 for the esrig, you pay $500 for the arava. And Bahavla is swallowed in that as the price for the esrog. We're going to see how this will be used in today's topic. And finally, the last topic that we will learn today is also referring back to the end of the Mishnah of Halacha Aleph. The Mishnah spoke about trappers. The Chachamim say that if a trapper of wild animals, a trapper of fish, these are the words, if they chance upon non-kosher species, you put a trap. What goes into the trap? Whatever went into the trap. So the Mishnah says, then that person is allowed to sell the non-kosher. They're not merchandising non-kosher. They're trapping animals. In the trap fell also non-kosher, they can sell it. Which implies that if you're not a trapper, if you're not a professional trapper, if you happen upon a dead carcass of an animal, you're not allowed to sell it. Rabbi Yehuda is more lenient. Rabbi Yehuda says even a non-trapper, as long as they did not intentionally they did not intentionally do business with treif. If they're walking down the street and they find a big dead carcass, so the din is that they are allowed to sell it. Says Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim argue. That is what we had in the Mishnah. What the Gemara will do is, the Gemara is going to bring a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim from a Masechta Sanhedrin regarding the rule that someone who violates Isurim connected to finances, that means that if a person has a weakness in their Yetzer Hara, that for financial gain, they do that which is prohibited, they are puzzled both to adjudicate, that means that they are puzzled to be dayanim for dinim mominus, and they are puzzled to be witnesses, because we are afraid that they're going to be bribed. We see that they're not honest when it comes to money. One of the examples the Mishnah gives in Sanhedrin, in other words, if someone behaves in a certain behavior and that will make them puzzled to be a dayan and an aid, will be someone who sells peiros shvius. And what we have over there, Masechta Sanhedrin, we have also a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, in which Rabbi Yehuda is more lenient than the Chachamim. We'll leave this from when we learn the Gemara inside. And the Gemara, that's the beauty of Yerushalmi, without spelling it out, expects of us to do our own yigiyah to understand how there is a lot of similarities between the leniency of Rabbi Yehuda and our Mishnah, as the leniency that Rabbi Yehuda has in Sanhedrin in the sugya of Psula Edus. And it's so similar, at kedei kach, and God willing, we're going to make it until the Mishnah, that the question will be that if we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in one area, does it automatically mean we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in the other area? And that will be a synopsis of today's daf. And now we are beginning inside daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph. Again, we just quoted the Braisa that has the pasuk Temeya Heima Lachem, from where we learned that one is not allowed to do schayda, you can't merchandise non-kosher foods, and the Braisa learned that it's limited only to foods that are non-kosher, Dvar Torah, biblically prohibited. Frek the Gemara, if that's the case, look at the brevity of the Gemara in Yerushalmi. What's the Gemara's question? It's common knowledge that we are allowed to buy and to sell a chamor. Chamor is not kosher then. How can you merchandise with non-kosher food? So the Gemara makes it very clear that since the majority of the transactions that are done with donkeys are not done for it to be consumed, people buy a donkey, right, to raise it for the work that the donkey will provide. In other words, since the donkey does not stand to be consumed, it's not included in this isur at all. So that's a very big clear. You can't merchandise with an item that's not kosher, that's being merchandised for eating. Now, what's amazing, harei gamol. Now, when you think about a gamol, people eat gemalim. So the Rash Elio says, yeah, the Yishmaelim eat gemalim. Look inside the Rash Elio, 4 lines from the top in the right column. And nevertheless, nowhere did we find that people limit themselves in the business of buying and selling camels. Answers the Gemara, in other words, this is not denying the fact that certain people, the Yishmaelim, they buy camels to eat them. Still, Stamoi, I'm reading the words in the Rashirilio. If you look at the world, stam, a gamal, is going to be sold for its work. In other words, implying that any item, even if it's still living, if stamoi is for it to be consumed, if the isur of its consumption is dvar Torah, it's included in the prohibition of doing schayra with that type. Doesn't have to be meat ready to be eaten. It can be alive. It's very important. And by the way, that is when trapping fish. I don't know how it. I know by animals, you trap animals. It doesn't mean that when you sell it in our Mishnah, we just quoted the end of the Mishnah. It doesn't mean it's dead yet. It's not a carcass yet. It can be an animal that you're going to sell to be consumed. Same thing with fish. People keep fish fresh. Not that I'm the big fisher, but when you catch a fish, what I know is you put it in a bucket of water. So if you're merchandising it, it's shaykh that you're merchandising it when it's still alive. If it's a non-kosher species and people buy it be'ikir to eat it, that is tak included in the isur of doing schayra with nevelas and trefish, katzim and amasim. Now, we did learn in the Baraisa that if the problem is midivreyen, then it's not included, not only not included, even midrabanan, there's no isur. It's muter lasis by schayra. And now the Gemara gives two examples that Rabbi Hoshaya, Nisav v'yahav means he bought and he sold. It means he did business. Bohadein murias, where's kevan? So murias, guys, we learned a lot about these different foods. Murias is really a fish oil that has bits of fatty fish in it. It's a fish dip. When we learned to some brachas, we used to joke around, the my Ashkenazi gefilte fish in the cans that I don't even know if you should make a bracha on it. The yellow, like that's murias. Now, what's the issue with murias? Not because murias came from non-kosher fishes. They used to add to the murias because it was so not pleasant, they used to add wine. Wine, stam yayin, now that the Chachamim said, not yayin, nesach is asan midoiraisa, but wine, stam yayin is asan midrabanan. So you would have thought that now we, God forbid, wine is asan midrabanan. You can't merchandise. So not true. Rabbi Hoshaya, based on the Braisa that we learned, did do business. He did merchandise murias because the isur is only midrabanan. And it's muter to do schayra with davar she'isur midivreim. Another example, Rab Chuna, nasa v'yahav, he sold and he bought. He gave and he took. That means he merchandised. He took and he gave. You buy and you sell. Bahadein chil tusam. Now chiltis is a certain sharp spice. It's a spice. It's a herb. But they listen to this, guys. They would cut the spice with a knife to make it into this dip. Now it's interesting that we are calling this in the category of Drabanan, and I know that people might jump on this. But we're not going to dive into this. We learned a lot about these dinim. For people who learn smicha, we learned a lot about it. That when it comes to beliois, we have to always remember that when you have a keli that was used previously for non-kosher, the issue of did you do hagala, is only if the item itself was clean. The only concern is that even though you cleaned it out, it has in its walls swallowed the taste of non-kosher and kabbalah kachpoltoi, right? So if something, or we just quoted a few days ago that if it's soaked, shaluk, what's the lotion that we used? Kimavushal, kavush kimavushal. So kavush kimavushal will mean that if I have a cup and I had a cold wine, but the yain stam. But if it sat in the cup for 24 hours or more, so then the taste of the wine went into the walls, and even though it's clean, that's before we get to beliyos, the problem is with the be'en, which means if the food itself is there, it's much worse. One such example are knives. Why is knife a problem? Because however they would clean their kalim then, and I know that it's now we clean it a lot better now. Knives, especially knives that have grooves in it, it would not be uncommon that a knife that was used to cut meat would have some of the fat of the meat adhered or stuck to the blade of the knife. Some of it. The shamnunius of the non-kosher. And if I'm going to take that same knife and I'm going to use it for my chiltis, and chiltis, especially chiltis, because chiltis is sharp, you have an issue of be'en. You have an issue of sharp, that sharp also touches on, it has the power to extract. These are the three dinim: heat, right? Basic smicha, right? Heat, soaking, sharp. Oh, I use it for an onion. What's the onion is sharp. So the issue of chilt is that even though the chances of it being treif, especially because of the dinim of bittul, midoiraisa will not be there. Let's leave it at that. But midirabanan, there's a problem because there is enough of an issue with the shamnunius that's stuck on the knife, compounded with the sharpness of the chilta spice, to be chayish midirabanan, that some of the taste of the non-kosher food that the goy used the knife for prior to cutting the chiltis went into the chiltis. So it's asr midrabanan. Nevertheless, Rab Chuna had no problem merchandising chiltis. Why? Because of the rule that we just learned, that the isur of schayr is only on a davar sheisurai min atayra, davar sheisurai midevreim muter lasois behem schayra. Very good. And now we're going back to the part of the Mishnah that's speaking about the isur of doing schayr with peder shvi'is. And as it gets clearer and clearer, this is not a blanket prohibition. It's not like you are never, ever allowed to sell anything that grew on Shvi'is. That's not true. You can't merchandise with it. One of the definitions of merchandising is that you gathered it and you sold it. Even if you didn't buy it, but if you picked it, you sold it, you got a problem. And the Mishnah therefore said that if I picked it and someone else sold it, it's not included in the Isur. The chiddush of the Mishnah is that even if my son is the one doing the selling, you would think that my son is an extension of me. We don't say that. That is what the Mishnah said. So now let's learn a brayso that's going to add, and not only will it add lechumra, it's going to add lekula. We're going to see how we're going to build a whole mountain on the yisoid that Rabbeinu HaKadosh put in great brevity in the Mishnah. So Tani, we learned in a brayso. Couple of rules. Rule number one is lo yiu chamisha melaktin yarag ve'echad moicher. Can't have a partnership in which you have 6 people that are part of a partnership. 5 of them, their job is to gather. All right. We're speaking about on Shvi'is. Don't forget that each person then is not allowed to gather a large quantity. That's the opinion of most of the Rishonim. You can't gather, but when you have 5 people, each one gathering a little bit, now you accumulate relatively a larger quantity. And you would think if 5 people gathered it and 1 person is selling it, what did the Mishnah say? That if the one that picked it is not the same one that's selling it, it's okay. Says the Brayso, not in this case. Now the question is, why not? And they're different from the Noisa Kalim. We're going to follow the sugya with the Rashirilio. And I know there are very different ways of understanding the problem. The Rashirilio, and we're going to keep your finger in it because we're going to learn the whole Brayso Lefi HaRashirilio. It's in the middle of the right column. It's around 12 lines from the top. In the beginning of the line, Tani, we learned in the Brayso, keep your finger in the Gemara, keep your finger in the Rash. Lo yiu chamisha melaktin yarig ve'echad moicher. Koloimer, says the Rash, afal gav. Even though the Mishnah says that if the one who does the gathering is not the same one that does the selling, it's permitted. Pa'amim, the chiddush of the Brayso is that sometimes the hanami yasir. And ukedoin, like we explained, you have 6 partners, shisha shutvim, and what is their agreement? 5 of the 6 are malakit. 1 of the 6 sell. Why would it be asur? The kiv and the kol kach malaktin b'shutvim. This mechzedim looks like they're doing regular business. That's the way that Rashi learns. In other words, what are we saying then? When you have 5 people gathering, you accumulate a large amount. A large amount. If I would be the only one picking it, there's a limit to how. I'm not allowed to pick to store. In the times of Chazal, people only ate 2 meals a day. So even to can pick for today and a little bit for tomorrow. But once you have 5, now 5 doesn't mean 4. You could, once 5 people, food that you are, that the it looks like in the merchandising. And you can't say, well, I follow Kaharama. But in other words, Me'ikar Adin, it's a bona fide merchandising. Okay, that's number one. Keep your finger on the Rash, and let's continue over here in the Braisa. Avol. Guys, I'm sorry with the internet. I don't know what this is. I know that we're paying top dollar from the internet. That I know. And we're in the same room with the machine. But if two people pick the vegetables, listen to the Chiddush here. We're not only saying that if Reuven and Shimon picked, so Reuven can sell Shimon's and Shimon's can sell Reuven. That's for sure. That's for sure. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. If you are not the same one, you picked, I can sell. Not only can we do it for each other, which by the way is already a Chiddush, no, the Braisa is saying more than that. The Braisa is saying that if me and you picked, since I have the right to sell yours, while I'm selling yours, I can sell mine. Ooh, let's look inside the Rash. So Perush Rabbeinu Shimshon, this Rabbeinu Shimshon, just for the record, so again, I know we mentioned this many times, the Rash Shirilio is an Achrein, right? We have him here in the Yerushalmi. He's the earliest Mephaidish. The Rabbeinu Shimshon, when people say Darash, generally, in Mishnayos, open up your Mishnayos. You're going to see that one of the main Mefarshei, HaMishnayos, Rishonim, is Rabbeinu Shimshon. That's called Darash. So he's quoting Darash, Avol, im lokat la'atzmai, v'chaveiroi nami likat la'atzmai, two people picked. Koloimer, shelo yinichoi kol ma sheliktoi biyachad. It's not that they gathered it together. Not that they gather it together. The moment you start gathering them, the Rash, that Rabbeinu Shimshon understands, it's already going to be problematic. Because once you start gathering, in other words, L'chura, he understands the five, lav dafka five, even two. But here, as long as each one keeps there in a separate pile, one will be allowed not only to sell his, one will also be allowed to sell his friends. How do you do that? You got that then? As long as we didn't mix it together, I'm allowed to sell yours. While I'm selling yours, I can sell mine. The buyer will have to take it from two different addresses because I didn't mix them together. But how am I allowed to sell mine? So the Rash, Rabbeinu Shimshon, says that this is the way we employ havla'ah. The way I will be allowed to do it. Let's say that mine is worth $5 and yours is worth $5. I'm only allowed to sell yours. What I could do is I can tell the buyer, listen here, I'm going to charge you $10 for my friends, but if you pay me the $10 for my friends, you can pick up my chavers and you can pick up mine. As long as you don't mix it together and you follow the rule of the Mishnah that I am allowed to sell yours because I didn't pick it, I can use that sale to somehow be mavliya mine if I know what I'm doing. And he quotes the din of Pedek Lulav HaGasal that we quoted in the words of introduction. Again, that in the year of Shvius, I'm going to sell you the Dalad Minim. I'm not going to charge you for the Esrik, but I'm going to charge you for the Arava, and the price of the Arava will cover the Esrik. So an esrik now costs like $200. Imagine we're going to live to see they charge $200 for the aravis. That's where we're heading towards. Because someone came to the shir, that's what they heard. They didn't hear that with that you get a bonus, esrik. That part they didn't hear. They only heard the part that the price of the esrik you charge for the arava. And then you do
You're not allowed to sell alcohol on certain websites. But people sometimes will just sell a bottle and they say that the contents are insignificant. A
Talmudic student explained that. And legally, he'll be right. It's going to work. Mamish. So let's go over here. I mean, all of this is the way many people learn this Braisa differently. Another din in the Mishnah. Chamisha achin melaktin. 5 brothers can gather vegetables. Ve'echad moicher al yedeihem. So here we have another chiddush. Look inside again, Darash Shadilio. Now we're already 4 lines from the bottom of the right column. First of all, brothers are not partners because the 5 partners we already said in the beginning of the Braisa, they may not do that. But the 5 brothers who are not partners. They will be allowed to sell. That which the Reish of the Braisa said you can't, that's by partners. But as long as they are not partners, even though they're brothers, so someone might suspect that, what are you talking about? They're not brothers, don't have to be partners. And therefore, if each one, that's the key, if each one who picked it for himself, you never mix the merchandise together. I have in my house, you have in your house, and one of them is selling. He's selling everyone's. He can still do it. How will he do it? I'm selling you only the others, and mine will be included by Havlah. Beautiful. And again, according to this is all the Rabbeinu Shimshon, the key is if they are partners, then if I buy and you buy, it's called together. I think that's the pshat, even if I didn't physically put it together. If the two people are not partners, then not only can I sell yours, I can even include mine in the sale in the oifen of Avlo. Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabun ubilvad. However goes not only in the case of the Braisa. Let's go back to the simple case of the Mishnah. I pick, you can sell. Where are you allowed to sell? So Rabbi Yosef Rabun says, Shelo yasu pileitar. Now we're going to touch, pileitar is a retailer. And if you sell it in the manner of an ordinary retailer, you will create the impression that you're doing schayda with Peter Shviz. Now, what does it mean, a retailer? What exactly may you not do? So the Gemara says, Umau b'vat yasu pileitar. So explains the Gemara that what? Two ways. One way is one understands that selling merchandise in the same location where you sell produce from other years, don't forget, you can sell peiros of the 6th year, of the 5th year, on the Shvi'is year, and you can merchandise it. So if I have a food store and I'm selling wheat lasts for many years, I'm selling grain. Even if the grain that grew on the 7th year was not the grain that I picked, I'm not allowed to sell it there. I cannot sell it in a location where there you are selling proper schayda, or schayda in a way where you have no restrictions how you can sell it. That's one way of understanding it. There is the Bayamemar, another way of understanding the concept of bilvat shelo ya'asu pileitar, that the lo yehe mizabin b'chol sham. In other words, even if I'm selling my peiros shvis in a different location, only peiros shvis is being sold. I cannot sell it there for the entire year. I cannot establish my place of business for the entire year. That's a big limitation. Now, how long can I stay? Am I allowed to stay a half a year? I don't know. But you can't have one. It's called in English a pop-up shop. Pop-up shop is like a seasonal thing. So you have to only sell it in a pop-up shop. And that's all of this is to make sure that the buyers know that they bought Peter Shvius. Because even when you are allowed to sell it, and the guy therefore is allowed to buy it, it's not Schayda, but Peter Shvius, the item is imbued with Kedusha Shvius. And you have to treat it accordingly. So you cannot take it out of the Holy Land, right? You cannot export Peter Shvius l'chutz la'aretz v'chulei v'chulei. So that's another way that you'll remember that this is Peter Shvius. Says the Gemara, Tani, we learned in a Braisa. Okay, this is more about selling. Boyfen hamuter, Peter Shvius, hachenveni. If you have a storekeeper, shoy mavashol yirakos b'shvius, who's selling, who's cooking and vegetables, and he's selling them. Listen to this. Lo yehi machashav schari al demei shvius. He cannot charge a fee for the value of the Peter Shvius. Okay, you cannot do that. Avol mechashavu ala yayin v'ala shemen v'al ha'av tolom. What you could do is that you're charging the person who's buying the vegetables not for the vegetables. You're charging him for the wine that people sometimes would add in the vegetables, and or for the oil. Obviously, guys, the wine and the oil is not shvius, because the same problem of selling Peter Shvius would go for the wine and the oil. But if I'm selling Peter Shvius, but I'm not selling it raw, I'm selling it cooked, and I'm charging for that. So the way you charge, again, the concept of havla is don't charge b'chlal for the peiros. You say, I'm charging you for the non-shvius wine. I'm charging you for the non-shvius oil. The third charge that you are allowed to make is called aftala. It's called schar batola. What's pshat schar batola? That during the time you were cooking peiros shvius, you were able to cook a non-shvius product. That you can charge for. Now, another chiddush, what does that imply? That you're not even allowed to take a wage for cooking peiros shvius. Even that is also. The only heter is that while I was cooking peiros shvius, I could have cooked other product. So my schar batala, the way we say it in the Bavli, or aftala, the fact that I was idle from doing work that's permitted, and I was doing this work, that is what I'm charging for. Quite amazing. No, you don't have to cash your kalim. Dan is asking a good point. Because the product is not there. Only the beliyas are there. Beliyas of isur is a problem. Shvius is not a problem. Shvius is mutter. Very good. All right. Says the Gemara, this is big. Rablo mefaked le'ilen chal torayom. There were people that made a business, and they would take wheat. I know today people think wheat, so you make it into flour. Lav dafka. They would snack on it. They would take the kernels, not grinding them, and they would scald them. They would throw hot water on it, or they would fry them. And that is what they would do. So people who would be producers of this type of scalded or fried wheat products, that loy tehevoin mechashvin agrechoin, don't charge for the oil that you use. Don't forget, these people were using on the Shvi'is year oil of Shvi'is. Same here was the opposite. The chitim were not, the oil was. So the whole idea of havla, ella al chitaya, charge for the wheat. They're not going to lose money. Again, going back to the example that we gave, by you pay for the aravos and you don't pay for the esrik. No, we learned a big rule that whenever you're having, when you have a composite of peiros shvius and non-peiros shvius, instead of you charging for the peiros shvius, another way, charge for the other part, even if it's minimum. In this case, it's the opposite again, because in this case, the oil that they were using, that was the issue. The oil was oil of shvius. The kernels was from the 6th year, from the 5th year. So he says, fine, make sure you tell the customers, I don't want you to pay me for the oil, even though you're coming to me because I fried it. No, I'm only charging you for the kernels, but you're going to pay more for these kernels. Havla. Okay. And now the final topic of today, which is going to lead us all the way to the Mishnah, will be the final topic in the Mishnah Halacha Aleph, and that is the Machlokes Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. So even though the Mishnah mentioned that you're not allowed to do schayra, b'nevelos treifer shkatzim and amasim, nevertheless, the Chachamim say that if you have a professional trapper and he chances upon non-kosher animals, because you put a net out. I do business with cattle, but in there, if Echveis came in Wilde Chaya, ran into my net, I can sell it. Everyone agrees to that. Rabbi Yehuda is even more lenient. He says, as long as this is not your intention, if you're walking down the street, you're not a trapper, that's the example that Rabbi Yehuda gives, and you chance upon a dead Wilde Chaya, and there's value to the carcass, you're allowed to take it and sell it. You take it and you sell it. You're not allowed to do schayra b'nevelos v'treifas. Yeah, that's because you're not buying and selling it, but you happened upon it. So you can chaparain and make a few dollars off it. The Chachamim disagree with it. So that's the machlokes we have over here, and we have a leniency. And the Gemara is going to bring a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim from a Masechta Sanhedrin. In the Bavli, it's on Daf Chav Dalit. We spoke it out in the words of introduction. There, the Mishnah, it's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says that there are certain people that are not eligible, they do not qualify not to be a dayan, not to adjudicate, nor to be witnesses, nor to be Edom. And one of the categories of people that are psulim to be a dayan and aid are people who engage in inappropriate monetary dealings. In other words, when you see that there's a person that because of their desire for money, that induces them to sin, right? One of the examples the Mishnah gives is Mesachik Bekuvia, a person who gambles. And there's an Isur Midrabanan to gamble because it's Gezela. You have another example the Mishnah gives us. People who lend money for interest. That's Isur Doiraisa. Or if they're not lending it ribis ktsutza, even if it's not a ribis ktsutza, it's a derabanan. People who allow themselves to get money from interest, even if it's only midrabanan. What do you see? This is a person, they know the din. Elamad, the nesoyin of money, tells them, they tell themselves, I'm going to get the money anyways. So the fear with both a judge and a witness is that they'll be bought off. And this person already has a track record that when it comes to geld, the person is not going to keep the correct standard. So the Mishnah says very clear. Now, one of the examples that the Mishnah gives of some sort of inappropriate monetary dealings that disqualify that person from adjudicating or from being a witness is a person who sells, who merchandises Peder Shvi'is. Very clear. Okay, same thing. Let's go with the like we said today with the this is the main. I'm quoting the Trumas Hadeshin because it is the Trumas Hadeshin that explicitly has this whole discussion, and the Bar Plukt is the Mishnah Lamelech, whether it's an Isur Derabanan as it says the Trumas Hadeshin, or as it is the Mishnah Lamelech B'Shita Sonamam that it's an Isur Deraisa. Be that as it may, right? So the person is violating, is doing schayda with Peder Shvi'is. He's weak when it comes to money. He's not keeping the mitzvahs. And that says Rabbi Yehuda, he limits the prohibition. That Amosai, when do we say that if a person does merchandise with Peder Shvi'is, he becomes ineligible to be a dayan and to be a witness? Says Rabbi Yehuda, that's only bisman she'ein loy umanois elohu. That is, if all this person does, that's his business. He sells Peder Shvi'is. But if he has another occupation, I know people remember the same thing when it comes to gambling, but let's leave gambling on the side over here. If he has another occupation, then harezek kosher. That's the nusach, that's the girsa that the Gra puts it over here because that's the issue. It's not about mutter and asr, it's about kosher or pasul. Okay. In other words, when does he become inherently untrustworthy? Only if schayda b'Peder Shvi'is is his or her, because she is anyways not good, not to be a dayan, not to be a aid, if that's their sole occupation. End of quote. End of quote. These are the words in the Mishnah. Now, Rabbi Yehuda can be understood in two ways. Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana. And both of the ways are going to be brought down in a Braisa. So let's go. Eich avida. What is pshat? What is pshat in what Rabbi Yehuda is saying? Let's interpret what he's saying. That it's only a problem, she'ein lo yumanus elohu. So says the Braisa, I'll tell you what that means. That if there is a person that during the other 6 years of the 7th cycle, he does nothing, he does no work. No, it's the only work is, the only time he's occupied in choil and doing business is with Peder Shvi'is. It's kivin sheba Shvi'is, hischil, mafshid yadoi, v'noisem b'Peder Aveda. That is what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. That's a very lenient understanding of Rabbi Yehuda. Avol im yesh lemelach acheres. But if during the other 6 years he has other sources of income, even though on the Shvi'is year he's only doing merchandise, he's only doing business with Peder Shvi'is kosher. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is meant to be taken literally. That if this guy has mamish no other trade at all, not only no other trade on the Shvi'is year, no other trade ever. That's one way. Clear. If this guy works in the other 6 years with no involving himself in nothing that's prohibited, not doiraisa, not the rabbanan. Elomad, this person's weakness is on Shvi'is. Kivin sheba Shvi'is, his chilu mafshed yodi v'noisem v'Peder. Even though on the Shvi'is year he does nothing other than selling Peder Shvi'is, afal pi she'enim melach acheres. Says the Braisa explicitly, even over here, Rabbi Yehuda is saying that we're going to get kosher. In other words, even though he's presently engaged only with Shvi'is produce, let me tell you even better, and he's being asked to be a witness on the year of Shvi'is. Now, for the past 6-7 months, all this Jew is doing unfortunately, is doing schayda with something that's asur. According to the Braisa's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, he's allowed to be a witness. Why? Because during the last year and next year, he's going to do other businesses. That's a big leniency. Now, Rabbi Bar Zavda says in the name of Rabbi Bo, who said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, that halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda, what's extremely important is we're going to follow the girs of the Maraful that changes everything. On this Amud, right, on this Amud, we have both, we don't have Pnei Moshe. So look, so the Marafulda is going to be on the right column, the second line from the top, and it's a big difference in his girsa. He says, we're goyres, halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda de Masni saw, that we follow the halacha of the way the Braisa understands Rabbi Yehuda. Because when you learn the Mishnah, we can understand Rabbi Yehuda in a much more stringent way. Mamish, he's saying that the only time a person who does chayda b'peiros shvius becomes a apostle l'dayin u'la'ed is only if that's mamish the only thing he does ever, his only occupation. On the side, this is tangential. I'm happy Danny did not opine over here because I think I pronounced it correctly, but this is parenthetically that the Gemara said that ikalas Rabbi Bar Zavda. The reason why everyone praised Rabbi Bar Zavda, that he was praised for the most important praise. He was very humble. You know what? For this, or for something similar to this, because he paskened by quoting Rabbi Abo. Rabbi Abo was from a much younger generation. Rabbi Abo, let me go like this, was one generation after Rav. Rabbi Abo, who was a student of Rabbi Elazar, was already the second generation after Rav, right? Rabbi Yechanan and Abelazar, Rav and Rabbi Yechanan were of the same generation. Rabbi Elazar was already younger also, even though Rabbi Elazar was a Talmud and then a Chaver of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Abo was a Talmud of Rabbi Elazar. And you would think that the elder would not quote a younger when it comes to paskening a din. Eloma Kabbalah Sa'emes Mamisha Amrei. This is on the side that Rabbi Bar Zavda was very humble. He never looked at who's older, who's younger. We're not talking about years. We're speaking about it's a whole different generation. He was a Talmud of Rav. He was right after Rav, Rabbi Ba. And nevertheless, when it came to a question as how do we interpret Rabbi Yehuda, he would follow the psak of Rabbi Ba. And that's why we praised him. I want you to know, says the Gemara, that not everyone understands Rabbi Yehuda the way we understood Rabbi Yehuda right now. Inside, actually, Tanei, Rabbi Yehuda, look, there's another Braisa that interprets Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah and Sanhedrin. The words are the same. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Bisman she'ein loy umanus Elohu. Abel yesh loy umanus shaloi hi harei kosher. The same words. There's a Braisa that understands it in a much more stringent way. And now let's quote this Braisa number 2. That Eichavida, what does it mean? Him having another occupation, him not having another occupation, that if the person is a working man and he's working b'davar hamuter during the 6 of the 7 years, and the only time he engages in illegal financial dealings is only on Shviz. But even there, if on Shvius himself, he's not only limiting himself to selling Peter Shvius, he's selling wheat. If the wheat is from the 6th year, there's nothing wrong with selling that. He's also selling Peter Shvius. That is where Rabbi Yehuda says mutter. In other words, not only is he doing a kosher business throughout the 6th of the 7th year, but if he also does on Shvius kosher business, that is where Rabbi Yehuda says that even though he's doing non-kosher business, he's okay to be a dayan or an aid. Avolav, but if on the 7th year, the only business he does is with Peter Shvius, puzzle, right? Even though he does kosher business during the rest. And let me go more than that. Even more than that. What happens if during the 6 years he does no business? Kivin Shabbos Shvius, but if this guy works one, he understood Shvius to mean you work once in 7 years. Look at the Chiddush over here. If he never works in the 6 years, and on the 7th year, he doesn't only do something illegal, he's selling Peter Shvius, and he's also selling Afal Pi Sheyesh is the Girsa. Even here it's going to be puzzle. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda, who allows a person who does chayre with Pei Shvius to adjudicate or to testify, that's only, listen to this, when is Rabbi Yehuda lenient? Very limited. Only if he both does kosher business in the 6 years and he also does kosher business on the 7th year. Now, says the Gemara that Loi bidor Rabbi Ba bar Zavda said in the name of Rabbi Bo b'shem Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yudi v'Vas Nisan. No, that's not when we quoted Rabbi, and then we said, we kalas Rabbi Ba bar Zavda, that people praise the humility of Rabbi. Why? Because the Mar Shmuel mishum ze'er minei, because he would quote a halacha even from someone from a younger generation. It was not on the second brayso. We want to make it clear. The Gemara in Yerushalmi is making it clear that Rabbi Ba's psak b'shem Rabbi Bo is based on the understanding of brayso number 1, not brayso number 2. Bottom line is that we have a leniency of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah and Shvis. We have a leniency of Rabbi Yehuda, especially according to the first brayso, especially in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin. And you would think that if we paskin, which we do, like Rabbi Yehuda, when it comes to Sanhedrin, so asks the Gemara is uf hachi kain. Look inside the end of the Ksav Yad Aleph of the Biur Hagra. Look all the way in the bottom. Not the way the Manafulda learns. He says beautiful. Perush im gabeit sayodim nami paskinin k'Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara is understanding that if we're going to accept the leniency, which we do, of Rabbi Yehuda and Sanhedrin, that we limit his psul only when there is explicit bad, only bad. He's only doing illegal business. Same thing over here. He's not someone who's buying and selling treif. He chanced upon it. Rabbi Yehuda is lenient. So we're making a correlation that l'chu'ura, or maybe since we know that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in Sanhedrin, so do we also, that's the way he understands the words, uf, hachi, kain, do we also paskin like Rabbi Yehuda over here? Daf nun zayin, no we don't. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Bun, no. Tamon, over there, ein hamalchus oineses. In other words, b'ram hache, by a professional trapper, the government would charge a tax money for everything that he caught. And for him not to be allowed to sell that which fell into his trap would be extremely difficult for him to do business. And let me go back to what we opened up today's shir is, and we're going to follow the psak of the Trumas Hadeshen. The whole isur of doing schayre with non-kosher food is an isur derabanan. The pasuk is just an asmachta. The chachamim were very sensitive to people's ability of making a livelihood. So here we have to be a lot more machmer, says Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Bun. Actually, the only reason why the Chachamim gave a little leniency is because if a trapper won't be able to sell the non-kosher animals that he trapped, he has to pay taxes on it. That's a pshat hamalchus is oineses and paying taxes. So they said, okay, Mela, go sell it. When you're walking down the street and I find a dead carcass, the government doesn't know about it. Don't pick it up. Don't sell it. You're not. No one is watching me. So therefore, there's no reason why we should be lenient. And we're separating the two sugyas. Anyway, there's a lot more to say. It's already 7:04. Today's the day of Kriyas HaTorah. Maybe I'll speak a bit more as to what's the comparison in the beginning of tomorrow's